Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. This is, I guess you could call it bonus content. We don't normally do a video on Sunday, but Tim and I have got together today because we're filming this week's Q&A. We've already asked for your questions. We've got a whole lot of those, so there'll probably be about 3 Q&As.
A lot of Q&As.
A lot of Q&As. But anyway, that aside, that is coming. Sorry for the noise with my seat there. Anyway, this is sort of bonus content that we weren't planning on doing, but we've had just an overwhelming amount of requests to discuss this. So it's not a well-scripted or thought-out piece. It's just a casual discussion about the UserBenchmark.com changes, what you guys think about it, their response, and I suppose what we think about it.
Yep.
So very casual. Apologies if we miss any points you guys wanted us to discuss. This wasn't something that we were really going to touch on. I personally wasn't very familiar with the website at all. I don't really use it. Tim has a bit of experience with it, he tells me. But yeah, we sort of told people on Twitter that asked us to cover it that we weren't interested in covering it. But since so many people have asked us, and Tim and I were sitting here thinking, well, what else are we going to do with our time? We might as well talk about this. So,
yep, sounds good to me. For those of you who aren't really aware of what userbenchmark.com is, it's basically a website where I believe you can either run a benchmark suite they provide or run your own benchmarks, and you basically upload it to their servers and they collate all of that information and then provide a variety of comparisons. So as a user, say you've got a 9900K, you run some benchmarks, you upload it, and all sorts of other users with the same CPU will run them, kind of averages it out and does all that stuff, provides you with what they are claiming are comprehensive numbers for all sorts of CPUs. And because they've got so many users using their test suite, they can have data for all sorts, all the CPUs basically that exist. So on top of that, another thing that a lot of people bring up is that they're very highly ranked in search. So if you search for CPU A versus CPU B, they tend to be right at the top of the search results. Any sort of, CPU with benchmarking in your search term, it'll also come up right at the top. So it's quite a popular site. People have been telling us that it's more widely viewed than say TechSpot and Antec, those sort of websites. So,
and it's an interesting tool, and it's kind of nice that it's user data driven, but of course that introduces loads of problems. So someone could upload 9900K results, but their CPU could be heavily thermal throttling, as an example, therefore underperforming massively and it would be at risk of skewing the results. I know if you get a big enough sample size, those outliers kind of get removed. I'm not sure what systems they have in place for removing ridiculously low or ridiculously high results. I'm not quite sure on that. That's not really what this discussion's about anyway, but
yeah, I mean, it's an issue worth bringing up because obviously user-generated results are not going to be as apples to apples as some reviewers
controlled
would do.
Condition test.
Yeah,
basically.
So especially I think for newer CPUs, you'd have, or any newer products, you'd have more variance in the numbers because you'd simply have fewer people who've benchmarked it. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, those are all sorts of issues that you get from this. But the big issue that people are talking about is the change that userbenchmark.com made to their weighting system. So when you go to a userbenchmark.com page for any CPU, you get a long list of different performance benchmark comparisons, different percentage indicators that tell you the comparisons between the products. But right at the top, they've got basically an overall weighted average that tells you, it summarizes, basically it tries to summarize everything about the CPU, the gaming performance, the single thread performance, multi-thread application, whatever performance.
It's made to make it quick and easy for you to compare different CPUs to see what you may want to purchase.
Yeah, so it can tell you CPU A is 10% faster than CPU B using the weighted average. So the weighted average used to be it had 30% of the number was derived from single threaded performance. 60% was from what they call a quad core metric.
So it's basically applications and games that use up to 4 cores or 4 threads.
And then they had 10% was multi-core performance, so above 4 cores. Then their new changes have increased the single core weighting from 30 to 40%. The quad core rating has dropped down slightly from 60 to 58%, and the multi-core rating has taken a pretty significant hit from 10% down to just 2%. So it's kind of Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because obviously CPUs are getting more and more cores, and then suddenly UserBenchmark.com has sort of gone the other way and increased the single core weighting as opposed to the multi-core. And that's what people are getting up in arms about.
They're getting up in arms about that because that doesn't make sense. And they're doing it at a time where the Ryzen 3000 series has just come out, and they're claiming they're performing too well. So they're nerfing the results for those CPUs so they don't
suspicious timing seems to be an issue.
Very suspicious timing. And not only is it suspicious timing, but as I said, it makes absolutely no sense because applications, and we've seen this with our own benchmarks, especially in the last 2 years, and it's continued even over the last year, they're becoming better at using multiple cores and putting multiple cores to work.
Even for something like gaming, which has typically been, quite single thread, single core demanding in the past, is now much more, especially with modern titles like your Assassin's Creeds, your Hitmans.
Most modern titles,
those require multi-core performance. So to change your weighting from taking multi-core from 10 to 2%, not changing quad-core all that much, but then increasing your single core from 30 to 40%, doesn't really make a lot of sense for testing those applications either. So userbenchmark.com, they do have an official response for this that they've published, I guess because they're receiving a lot of heat at the moment. And so I'll just read it out here. They say, shortly after the Ryzen 3000 release, which we welcomed emphatically, we noticed that our CPU gaming and desktop estimates were unrealistically overestimating CPUs with core counts beyond 8, so we corrected the estimates. Our underlying data points for single, quad, and multi-core performance remain unchanged and are clearly visible together with gaming, desktop, and workstation scores on each of our product and comparison pages. Back in the days of the AMD FX 8350, our effective speed index was predominantly single core, and at that time we were heavily lobbied with cries of cores are only getting more and more relevant. Any professional software developer that has actually tried to write scalable multi-threaded code will understand that the challenges are both far from trivial and highly unlikely to be overcome during the lifetime of a typical CPU. We frequently tune our effective speed indices to match the latest developments and will continue to do so independently. Presently, we are aware that we slightly overestimate the latest batch of AMD 5700 graphics cards, but unsurprisingly, nobody is crying fire and continuously spamming about that. Beware the organized army of shills who deal in hot air rather than reason. Only trust independent sources to know your chops before parting with even a penny of your hard-earned cash. May the force be with you. Did they actually put "May the force be with you" in there?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's
very bizarre to talk about CPUs such as the FX 8350. So that might have happened, but again, even over that period of time, we moved away from dual-core processors. And we moved into quad cores. And then we only stopped at quad cores because Intel didn't have anything competitive to push beyond that. But that still happened. Like, there wasn't a heavy single core weighting even back then.
Yeah, and there's a piece in here that I really don't understand. It says any professional software developer that has actually tried to write scalable multi-threaded code will understand that there are challenges, right?
It sounds like they're in like 2006 or something.
Yeah, I was thinking like, okay, sure, there are genuine challenges with taking things that are single-threaded and trying to make them multi-threaded. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, we're so capped out on single-threaded performance. Like, it's not really increasing all that much in the past 10 years or so, even with the introduction of Ryzen, that it doesn't make sense to focus a lot of time developing single-threaded algorithms anymore because you're not going to be able to scale that particularly well. So a lot of the development efforts these days are to be making things multi-threaded.
Absolutely.
Sure, there are some things that you just can't make multi-threaded. There are things that the algorithm just doesn't work when you parallelize it. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of applications, we're not seeing either it being stagnant with single-threaded and just continually being single-threaded. We're seeing it become more multi-threaded. And, all these companies are trying to make their various different pieces of software more multi-threaded. And the reason why a lot of it isn't multi-threaded at the moment is that it was based in a time where that code was single-threaded. So say for an entire rewrite of the program, which companies aren't really willing to do, it's a much more slow process towards this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit silly what I'm about to say, but kind of proves the point. What do you think's going to be faster? A Coffee Lake CPU with one core clocked at 4 gigahertz or 4 cores clocked at 1 gigahertz?
I mean, you'd think the single core would be faster.
It won't. There's no way. It'll be choked to death and it will barely function, the computer. That's my guess.
In the single...
We're just running Windows 10.
Just running Windows.
Running Windows 10 and maybe doing anything.
Yeah, you're probably right. I was thinking a single thread...
Well, first of all, I think that you'll be hard-pressed finding any game made recently that will actually operate on a single-core processor.
You're right. There's limits, aren't there? They require like 4 threads, a lot of them these days.
But imagine even opening up Chrome and then running some other basic application and then some other basic application and just going back and forth between those and doing basic things in them.
It'll be pretty painful.
The 1 gigahertz quad core would be faster.
Yeah.
And so that doesn't make sense. I mean, we could do this test to prove the point, but it doesn't make sense that you would wait 40% on the single and then only 2% on the multi.
And the split between quad and multi also doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, if you're going to
that should just be one.
If you're going to count multi-threaded workloads, why are you limiting quad cores to 58% of the weighting, but higher than quad cores only get 2% of the weighting? Something like Premiere, for example.
That's like to give Intel an advantage, surely.
Surely that's the reason.
That's an Intel metric for sure.
Because if an app is multi-threaded capable, then it's going to, generally speaking, scale up beyond your quad-core type thing. Unless they're referring to games, which still doesn't make a lot of sense.
But that's like a
time
time capsule.
Yeah.
Because you can go get a game that's progressed further on in that series or based on a newer game engine and it will use more than 4. But applications that have been updated over time, they will have gone through a series of how well they utilize multi-core processors. So it's kind of, I don't think there's a whole segment of applications that are still stuck in quad core.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what multi-thread applications these days are quad core only and don't scale beyond that?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Yeah, it's like a version of Blender that's released today. Like Blender's stuck at quad core.
Yeah,
because that software package would die because people would then just use the alternative.
Yeah.
So it's a bit strange that.
Sure, like professional workloads like your Premiere, your video, not video encoding, but like your 3D rendering are niche type applications. But most of those applications fall within that 2%. Just 2%. It's not enough. Like a lot of people, especially when comparing CPUs, are choosing between something like a 9900K and a 3900X for something like Premiere, and that's not going to be in the quad core thing. It's only going to be in that small 2%, which seems just bizarre.
Yeah, they actually address more than 4 cores are nice to have. They address that in this paragraph here.
Yeah, so they say, the addition of each successive core beyond the first becomes increasingly less relevant to a typical consumer. On a well-maintained PC, 100% utilization of 4 cores will only normally occur during heavily threaded workstation operations, such as a number crunching or audio-video production. Of course, some games will also max out 4 cores, but averaged over multiple games, there is not a significant difference in FPS between a 6-core i5-8400 and a 4-core i3-8350K or a 4-core i5-7600K. Higher core counts allow for slightly looser PC management by masking the effects of malware and other resource-draining processes such as spontaneous Windows updates and unsolicited virus scans.
So, we've already seen recently that that's completely untrue because the Ryzen 5 1600 is now performing significantly better and much more consistently than the 7600K in today's games, such as Assassin's Creed Odyssey, all the modern Battlefield games, whether it's Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 5, The Division 2. I think I've actually got a list probably somewhere here. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the Hitman 2, Total War 3 Kingdoms. Like, there's a lot of new games, and there'll be a lot more games coming out where the Ryzen processor, the R5 1600, is much better than the Core i5 because it isn't limited to 4 threads.
Yeah, and I think the thing that they're missing here is that while, yeah, sure, some games will only max out 4 cores or thereabouts, and over an average, it might not be that different, but if you've got a quad core and an 8-core CPU, and the game only uses 4 cores, both of them are going to perform the same because the 8-core one just has more cores.
That's right.
Whereas the quad-core is going to suffer any time there's a game that uses more than 4 cores.
That's
so
right.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to say that that's fine just because you're averaging over the entire range of games. The performance will be the same for your quad-core games and worse on the quad-cores as it gets higher and higher. So, again, they're just...
That's the big problem. And again, that's the same thing we saw with the 7600K and the R5 1600.
Yeah.
The R5 1600 was slower in Far Cry. Older game engine bit data doesn't take advantage of the extra cores and threads. So it runs a bit slower, but the R5 1600 still offered really good frame time performance. So it was smooth, but you cannot say the same about the 7600K in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Battlefield 5. There it suffered massive stuttering issues due to not having enough CPU resources. And then I think another reason why people are so annoyed with this is because it's meant to, well, whether it's meant to be or not, people use it as some kind of buying guide. And you don't want to be talking about games that have past games. You don't want to be talking about performance there. You don't even really want to be focusing just on the here and now. You want to be taking what we've already seen up to now, which is over the last year, 6-core processors coming into their own, and we know consoles are going 8-core. I'm not trying to say that means you need an 8-core CPU, but you will certainly need a more powerful CPU going forward. So to weight all these things on what we've seen, what sounds like a decade ago almost, it's that dated, for people who are buying a CPU now that they plan on keeping for 2, 3, 4, 5 years is very strange.
Yeah, I mean, we see some of these comparisons, like we've listed some of these in our document here about some just ridiculous results that come about because of this, comparison. You're talking about a Core i3 8350K being ranked like much higher than a Ryzen 7 2700X.
So they're claiming that the Core i3 processor is 2% faster than the Ryzen 7 2700X. So 2% is not a great margin, but the fact that they're claiming a 4-core, 4-threaded Core i3 processor, a Coffee Lake quad-core, is 2% faster than an 8-core, 16-thread second-generation Ryzen processor. That's just crazy.
Well, yeah, and you can see in their sort of small breakdown here, they've got gaming, desktop, and workstation performance split up. Now, you look 2% overall, and it's getting that from gaming being at an 83 percentage points versus 82 percentage points for the Ryzen 7 2700X. Desktop performance is 84 percentage points versus 82%
2%.
on the Ryzen 7 2700X. So you think, okay, in both those two situations, yes, they're claiming the 8350K is faster. But then you look at this workstation performance, 43 percentage points versus 85 percentage points, yet they're still overall giving a plus 2% advantage to the 8350K. That's pretty
weird. So
and you even scroll down to some of these performance breakdowns that they've got here.
Well, this is interesting. They're saying for single-core workloads, the Core i3 processor is 7% faster. For quad-core workloads, it's 1% faster. But then for multi-core mixed workloads, the Ryzen 7 processor is 169% faster.
Yep.
How does that... I don't even know how that gets you to...
And you see in the average user bench here, the overall performance is only listed as plus 54%. So even when they take all of these things, the single core, quad core, and multi-core, and the average it, they're giving a plus 54% advantage to the Ryzen 7 2700X. But then when you look at their effective speed metric, that switches over to plus 2% for the 8350K. Like, how did they come up with that? Even when you look, say, peak overclocked bench, plus 37% for the 2700X. Their value sentiment, they've got plus 600% for the 2700X. Nice to haves. These are all things like cores, threads, turbo clocks, integer performance, blah, 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 blah. Plus 49% for the 2700X. So in all of their individual breakdowns they go through, there's a significant wins for the 2700X. And then right at the end, they've got this average bench, 83.4% percentage points to the 8350K, 82.1% to the 2700X. So even based on the data they're showing on the very screen that you can see and scroll through, they are themselves awarding all these wins to the 2700X, then suddenly coming up with the 8350K being better overall.
It's
it's very suspicious, isn't it?
It's very skewed.
It's very weird.
So all that pretty well covers what I was about to say next anyway, but I'll get into it. So we've obviously recently benchmarked the 7600K, which is very similar to the 8350K in terms of performance. So the 8350K is clocked about 5% higher, and it has 2 megabytes extra L3 cache, which will account for a little bit of a performance boost, but nothing crazy. So the 2700X in our own testing, which we've recently done, it's all up to date, it is 200% faster than the 7600K for 7-zip decompression, 50% faster in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, 102% faster in Battlefield 5 when looking at 1% lows, 170% faster in Blender Open Data, 51% faster in the Division 2 for the average frame rate, and then 51% faster for the 1% low, 50% faster in Hitman 2, 53% faster in Total War 3 Kingdoms, 37% faster in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 6% slower in Far Cry, both averaged over 100 FPS with smooth gameplay, but the Ryzen CPU was slower in that one game. 100% faster in Premiere, they offered the same single-core performance in Cinebench, and then it was 148% faster for CB20 Multi. So that looks like much more, well, it doesn't look like overall that the Ryzen 7 2700X was 2% slower in that.
No, I mean, that data doesn't suggest it, does it?
No. So if you test with just games like Far Cry, which is one of the few new games we have that doesn't play well with Ryzen processors in general, and in particular core-heavy processors, so that is an outlier of modern games, but it does happen. So it's fine to acknowledge that. And if you go round up a heap of older games, you'll find that overall a Ryzen processor is slower. But that certainly doesn't represent modern gaming, and it certainly won't represent gaming in 1 or 2 years' time.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on and talk about all these other comparisons that we've come up with, but I think the point is kind of made with one. I mean, the 8350K versus the Threadripper 2990WX is even more ridiculous because they say the 8350K is 6% faster there or something. So it's like you can go through and find comparisons where weird Intel CPUs, the 8350K, they claim, the 7350K, sorry, they claim is 9% faster than the Core i5 7400.
So that's a
two
dual
cores
core versus a quad core.
Yep.
2 cores with 4 threads versus 4 cores with 4 threads,
Yep.
which is always going to be faster even with the clock speed deficit.
Yeah, so there's endless comparisons that
one last one. Let's just do one more to make the point.
Okay.
So,
okay.
See, the Threadripper one's a bit silly because you're comparing a 32-core processor, which does have issues with games.
Yeah, they're not.
They're completely different animals.
Yeah.
So it's like comparing a truck and a Ferrari and saying that one's bad at hauling and then one's bad at being a race car. So it's just a bit silly. But let's take the Ryzen 5 1600 versus the Core i5 7600K. So we recently did a throwback, a 2-year revisit of those CPUs on Hardware Unboxed. And so they found, their weighting system, they found overall that the 7600K was 17% faster than the R5 1600. It was 13% faster for desktop usage and 12% faster for gaming. So in our own tests, we found that the Ryzen 5 1600 was 16% faster in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, 78% faster in Battlefield 5 when comparing 1% low performance, 33% faster in The Division 2, 25% slower in Far Cry New Dawn, so there you go, there's one where it does trail, but then 10% faster in Hitman 2, 10% slower in Rage 2, and 22% faster in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So there is 2 games there where the Ryzen processor is a bit slower, but there are a few games there where it's massively faster. And again, the 7600K does suffer from massive stuttering issues in Battlefield 5, whereas the Ryzen 5 1600 doesn't. And obviously that problem is going to become more pronounced in the future with more demanding games. So, that's a bad comparison. Actually, there's one more I've got to talk about. I've quickly got to talk about the Ryzen 5 3600 being just 9% faster on average than the Core i5 9400F, which is a comparison I just made. It was quite a brutal one. So they're saying the 3600 is just 10% faster in single, 8% faster in quad, and 57% faster for multi-core. When in reality, Well, the multi-core is actually not too bad. It's just their weighting system which skews it all up. So in Cinebench 20 multi, the Ryzen processor is 52% faster, and it's 14% faster in the single. So that's not too far off what they've got there. And then you see things like it's 84% faster in WinRAR, 66% faster in 7-zip, 26% faster in Premiere, 49% faster in V-Ray, 58% faster in Corona, 53% faster in Blender, 30% faster in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, 34% faster in Battlefield 1, 1% lows, 10% faster in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 1% lows, 29% faster in The Division 2, and it goes on and on. So their actual results there for the single and multi are quite close. And if you chuck the 8% from quad-core into the 57% for the multi, they're actually not that inaccurate. The problem is how they then go and give that overall effective speed index just makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, and I think, it's as we look through all these results and we sort of, you see all these performance the issues in terms of comparisons that they're coming up with, and you go, yeah, this new weighting system doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It looks like it's significantly favoring Intel processors and favoring things that modern
Clearly
applications aren't doing. But then even when you go back and you look at how the previous weighting system was, that wasn't great either. 30% still on the single, 60% quad, 10% multi. That is not going to significantly change this weighting all that much. You're still talking about a 30% weighted to single and only 10% to multi-core.
You're right, it needed to be upgraded in the other direction.
Yeah. So, a lot of this issue that's come about right now has been because people think that this specific change to the weighting system is, completely ridiculous and biased and unfair. Whereas really this website seems to have never provided good benchmark comparisons.
The single core performance is very important, but the problem with weighting it so heavily is that you end up with dual core processors ranking miles higher than they should.
Yeah, no one's buying or using dual core CPUs or wanting to use dual core CPUs.
That's the problem.
And, we already talked a little bit about, how are these results being taken. We can quite easily see from our performance numbers that, we're comparing two CPUs in gaming at 1080p with, a 2080 Ti. We're using, all the stuff to remove the bottleneck and make it a pure CPU comparison. But because these are user-generated information, when they're coming up with their gaming numbers that seem to be quite heavily weighted to single-core performance, who knows? They can't possibly have had every user test with a 2080 Ti. They can't have possibly had everyone be testing at 1080p.
Yeah, so there's a lot of GPU-bound stuff.
There's going to be a lot of stuff where the data they're getting is not actually a CPU comparison. And I think, Gamers Nexus was talking about how, this website has always been rubbish and how could you possibly trust, a website that has user-generated results like this. And that's kind of why when I look at this issue that's cropped up, I sort of think, yeah, okay, the change to the weighting system's bad, but it's not like the website was ever good. It's not like it's something that should be used and people is only now suddenly giving people bad buying advice.
No, and that's why we were talking with Steve from Gamers Nexus, and neither he or us had any intention of covering this. It's just that over the last few days, we're kind of given in, I suppose.
I mean, the bigger issue to me is that this website ranks highly in search results at all.
Yeah.
That's the problem. The problem is that this website is SEO optimized to sort of give you results like this.
Sure, but if it's popular and people like doing it and using it and they enjoy it, then it's like hard to say it shouldn't rank well.
I guess that's fair. If people are using it, then people are using it, right?
And I think that's our point of view as well, though, because Tim and I bashing it or saying the weighting's garbage or the results are garbage or the site's terrible, and I'm sure Steve from Gamers Nexus has the same opinion, us coming out and doing that, which we're effectively doing right now, changes nothing because this site's driven by you.
Yeah.
Like it's complete. It's called UserBenchmark. Like it's driven by users.
I still think while that is a valid point, it's sort of people are concerned about your novice users that wouldn't be watching our content or Gamers Nexus or Nantech or whatever, and are just very early into building PCs. They're going to be using a resource like this. So by a lot of people driving traffic towards this site who might understand how it actually works, it's kind of promoting it to people that it really shouldn't be promoted to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my issue with this whole user benchmark thing. Is that it is a resource that you can use if you want to, but to me, it shouldn't be a prime resource that you use for buying decisions. It's just not accurate enough.
But whenever something's popular like this, it's like, what can you do? That's always going to happen.
Our audience is not the audience that would use UserBenchmark.com seriously anyway.
Well, yeah, so there's a few ways to look at what they've done here, I guess is what we should move into. So they said that they've made these changes because, did they say greater than 8-core processors are skewing the results?
Yeah, that's what they said.
So that's bizarre, because the only new 3rd-gen Ryzen CPU with more than 8 cores right now is the 3900X. So they've completely changed the entire weighting system, how the website works for one CPU, even though we've had Skylake X and Threadripper CPUs for how long?
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Makes no sense.
I mean, if you take a sort of nefarious approach, on their website, the 9900K is the fastest CPU that they list. And you could potentially think that maybe in their previous weighting system that had made the 3900X
definitely would have
the fastest CPU that they've got on there.
Would have, yeah.
But even then, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because sure, yes, in the desktop, consumer desktop scene, the 3900X, 9900K is probably the fastest CPUs going around, but there's high-end desktop chips too, and how do you factor those in? Something like a 2990WX, or more realistically a 2950X, in a lot of situations is still going to be one of the fastest CPUs, or even like a 9980XE is going to still be a very fast CPU and potentially faster than a 9900K. So the fact that even that CPU wasn't already being ranked quite highly in their algorithm shows that something's up.
That's right. And that CPU, the 18-core Skylake X part, should always beat the 900K in these kinds of systems, because, the 900K is going to be a little bit faster for gaming, but it's going to be a lot slower for productivity tasks.
Yeah.
And who are you to say, Blender or, encoding or rendering or video creation or any of that sort of stuff isn't mainstream? I mean, I'm not trying to say it is, but how do I know you don't want that? What's the point of making a system that tells you can run Microsoft Word and a web browser? Because, you could just get an Intel Atom-based SoC thing that will do that.
You'd be surprised how bad those are, those tasks, though.
I haven't used one for a while. But you know what my point is.
Yeah,
It's you talked about that earlier. It's stuff that's irrelevant. We just assume that these CPUs can run Windows.
Yeah.
And that they can run basic applications.
I mean, to me, I always think that you can't categorize these CPUs in a single number. You can't get, whether you're doing it via a weighted average or you're giving a score or whatever the situation is, it's just, there's too many factors at play to summarize everything a CPU or GPU or whatever does into one number.
Yeah, so you need a gaming category, a core-heavy productivity category.
Because we were talking earlier about how ridiculous it is to compare an 8350K to a 2990WX, right? Yeah. And it's like, sure, on a weighted average, probably a 2990WX should smoke it if it was weighted in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
But really, those two CPUs are not comparable.
No.
You're not, the buyer of an 8350K is not the buyer of a 2990WX. So that the summary, the performance weighting, it just shouldn't exist. It should just be a whole bunch of different categories you can go through. You can see how does it look in older games, newer games,
well, it needs
single-threaded productivity, high core count productivity, blah, blah, blah. And then as a buyer, you can say, okay, I'm interested in newer games and multi-threaded productivity tasks. Then you can look at the averages that the site produces.
Yeah, and you can kind of refine the search with prices and stuff like that, but I feel like they almost need to be their own categories, whether it's high-end desktop platform versus mainstream desktop platform or
laptop
whatever.
CPUs in their own category, etc.
But the core issue here is the fact that they've adjusted their weighting system, which they probably needed to do, and they went in the complete opposite direction to what makes any kind of logical sense.
Yeah,
2019. They're talking about they're acting as if applications are all still single-threaded.
No, not even that. They've acted that, because a lot of applications still are single-threaded. They've acted that applications have become more single-threaded.
Sure, yeah.
That's the main issue.
Yeah.
They've acted that PCs have suddenly become more single-threaded, which just isn't the case.
So, if they want to, well, it seems like they've lost a lot of goodwill with a lot of people that use the site.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is just angry AMD fanboys. I think this is people who smell a bit of foul play going on, which it doesn't look good. We don't want to accuse them of anything because, we're constantly accused of being AMD shills or paid by NVIDIA because we do one favorable review for a certain company or whatever. All gets a bit silly. The timing on this doesn't look good, and it makes no sense what they're doing. So if they really care about their user base and they care about the website and there's no external forces feeding them money to manipulate things in a certain direction, what they should do is chuck up maybe a series of polls. And how do you guys, because that's what we do. Whenever we I'm not saying it's 100% driven by that, but if we sort of get to a point where we can't make a decision, we throw it over to you guys. Do you think we need to include this? Do you think we need to test this way? And almost always it lines up with what we're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to make a change like this and you're not going to get user feedback, you have to make sure, especially for a site that appears to be quite data-driven, that your choice is based on data. And this choice just isn't based on data and isn't...
It's not logical at all.
Or at least, if they have based on data, they haven't explained it. And because their explanation is very lackluster and doesn't really give many insights into the situation. Yeah. So when you make a change that goes against most people's logical sense, and you basically just don't explain it very well, or you don't have an explanation, then it looks pretty suspicious.
Very.
And even if they're not accepting money from various parties to manipulate results, it's just a bad look. And if you want to make it not appear like a bad look, you just have to present an explanation that would actually make sense. And I just don't think it's actually possible to have an explanation that makes sense.
I don't think you can justify that decision. And I think what they need to do now is, like I said, hand it over to their viewership, do a poll on the website with maybe multiple different polls. Do you think we should do this? Do you think what makes the most sense? What would you guys like to see? And go from there. Because I'd be pretty surprised if even a small percent, I don't know, I'd be very surprised if even 10% of their viewers agree with the direction they've taken. But
yeah, and I mean, like I said, my opinion is that they need to scrap the weighted average and just go with various different categories.
I think that'll be more useful, yeah.
Because I think, it's all well and good to try and make it as simple as possible and give you that one number. But I think even the most novice, basic PC builder user or someone comparing OEM systems, whatever, is still going to understand maybe 5 to 10 different breakdowns for things like web, make it super simple, like web
3
browsing,
would be fine.
Productivity tests, gaming.
That'd be fine. That'll work perfectly well. And
then you can maybe click some knobs and tweak some dials and you get more data. You can see more comparisons.
Well, since I've been made aware of the website, I find it just as misleading for purchasing an Intel CPU.
Yeah,
because you can buy the wrong Intel CPU when comparing different Intel CPUs.
Yeah.
And it's not just a small error, or it's like really bad deals are being presented as much better deals than they really are. So anyway, it's I don't know, do we have much more to say on it?
Yeah, it's just a site that I wouldn't have ever recommended to just become...
No, it wasn't something I was ever actually aware of until this issue.
That's kind of why we didn't want to cover it, because it's kind of like a website that really isn't very good is sort of just changing things. And
well, also, if I had been using it for a long time, and maybe even I didn't recommend it or believe in it, but I was familiar with it and I'd sort of followed the website's evolution, whatever you want to call it, and they made this change, and then I felt quite strongly about it because I had some skin in the game. I was invested in it somehow, but I'd never really heard of them. I'm sure I must have been researching something once upon a time and came across the website, and I would have just clicked away because I know those GPU boss and all those kind of...
There's so many of them.
Yeah, I just avoid them like the plague. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about it because you guys want us to. I suppose let us know what you guys think in the comment section below. We'll review your feedback. But I think in summary, basically, we think it doesn't look good. It's very poorly timed, and it doesn't make any sense, the direction they've decided to go with it. And yeah, we don't want to accuse them of being bribed by Intel, but
it's not a good look.
It's not a good look. It's not a good look at all. And again, we hate the shill stuff. We know it comes up a lot, but we wouldn't put it past Intel to, after the Ryzen 3000 launch, look at targeting websites like this and offering them substantial amounts of money to change things. Again, we have no evidence that that's happened here, but it's just very poorly timed and a very bad decision, in our opinion.
Yep, I think that pretty much covers it. I think it's also kind of an interesting issue in that you guys watching this video, probably not the sort of audience that would be taking the word of userbenchmark.com as gospel and making all your buying decisions. I mean, you're watching Hardware Unboxed, you're probably watching it because of our independent testing that's a bit more apples to apples than what they provide. But definitely there's implications for your novice user, the person that just Googles stuff. And, it'd be great if this website wasn't ranked super high in Google, but, it's just the way it is. We can't go and make a video for every single CPU comparison in existence, whereas for a site like userbenchmark.com, they can just auto-generate all those pages.
The idea is great, and it seems like it could be really useful, but in reality...
you need very heavy data control. You need to have someone that looks through the numbers coming in and scrap all the people that are testing in like GPU limited.
It's just so hard though. Like even if I test a CPU and I don't really tell Tim exactly how I've done it, and then I tell him to test something else and compare that data, it's going to be so bad. Yeah,
it just has to be done.
So
the best way is to control all your variables, and a site like userbenchmark.com unfortunately is just unable to control.
It's really
variables.
The hardest part about benchmarking. Running a benchmark is extremely easy, but getting consistent data across multiple platforms is actually quite difficult. So that's the challenge.
Repeatability is what you want.
Yeah.
And if you're not repeatable, then
well, that's what we spend all our time doing, is making sure that everything's controlled correctly. That's the hard part, basically. Is what it boils down to. But anyway, hope you guys didn't mind this sort of casual, non-scripted, last-minute kind of decision to make this video. But it's just a bit of a Sunday bonus, so let us know what you think. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. We have all our Q&As coming, which are sort of casual as well. So it's going to be a pretty casual week here, but that gives us a chance to do a whole lot of benchmarking. There's some things that have been requested in the Q&As that we'll be starting on this week, some various benchmarking and things, so lots of good stuff to look forward to. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
And we'll see you again next time.